I'm delighted to see so many people here on this rainy day. It's really wonderful that you get up, that you come. We are very happy to see so many people for this wonderful event, a celebratory event for us and for our honorees. Before we begin, I just want to thank our wonderful sponsors who have supported these breakfasts. This is the 143rd breakfast. The law firm of Greenberg Traurig. I saw Ed Wallace here. I just acknowledge him. He's been a wonderful supporter, and Greenberg Traurig is one of our founding sponsors. Con Edison, another founding sponsor. Francis Rashevsky, Senior Vice President, is here, and we thank you. Verizon, Richard Windrum, I didn't see him. I think he may be here. Another founding sponsors. Our Gold Star sponsors, everybody who has contributed. And on the tables are our report, our 22nd year, and it lists every person who's contributed to the center financially over the last several years. We're delighted that so many people have to keep this institution going. We thank you, and we thank you for being here today. So let me bring up to the podium our President and Dean, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much, Ross, and I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning to celebrate 5 extraordinary recipients of our 3rd annual Civic Fame Awards. Last night, when we were leaving here a little bit late, it started to thunder, and I was afraid we'd have to call this the Civic Rain Awards, and I'm glad it wasn't too bad out and that all of you are here. So year after year, our Center for New York City Law, led by the wonderful Ross Sandler, outdoes itself. Absolutely. It really outdoes itself, and it's become known as it's really one of the premier breakfast meetings that bring together the city's leaders. It outdoes itself with arranging for the top policymakers in city government and our partners in the private sector and nonprofit world to come and speak to all of you. Along with City Law's publications, which are known as City Law and City Land, the Center continues to be the premier chronicler of the most important policy and legal developments in city government. And today, we have 4 honorees who are not only longtime, highly influential figures in our public policy and civic discourse, but they're also extraordinary friends of the center. So I want to congratulate Mayor David Dinkins, who is here. He came... He came 2 years ago to talk about his book, A Mayor's Life, Governing New York's Gorgeous Mosaic, and he just was wonderful, and the students were mesmerized, and what a nice thing to present a Civic Fame Award to him, because Civic Fame, the wonderful statue, sits atop the David N. Dinkins Municipal Building. In addition, we have Wayne Hawley, who just recently retired as the Deputy Executive Director and General Counsel of the Conflicts of Interest Board. Con Ed, Francis Rashevsky and her team are here, thank you. And we honor New York One's Inside City Hall, and Errol Lewis is here and they're celebrating their 25th anniversary. And one honoree, Susan Hinkson, who just retired as the Vice Chair of the Board of Standards and Appeals, and she's an extraordinary alumna of the school. Although she's not here, she's here with us in spirit, and we honor her today as well. All of these individuals and institutions have had an extraordinary impact on our city. They've also helped our work at the law school tremendously. I want to say that Wayne Hawley was one of my closest colleagues when I was counsel to Mayor Bloomberg, and he's been a close partner of the center as well. And I serve on the Conflicts of Interest Board, and I can't tell you how hard it is to imagine going forward without him. He's left his role in very able hands. And I want to point out the Conflicts Board staff is right here front and center, and they got their seats legitimately. I just had to point that out. It's certainly an honor to be joined by Errol, who is a mainstay here. He does so much with our school and has come to this awards breakfast previously, and he's a wonderful friend. And he continues to be one of the most insightful commentators on politics and policy, and his voice has never been more necessary as events rapidly transpire, both locally and nationally. So he's not just on New York One, but he's on CNN frequently, and we are always appreciative of his wonderful perspectives. So with that, I want to ask Ross to come back up and offer some more perspectives on our honorees today, and then we will present our awards. Ross?
Thank you, Anthony. We're very fortunate to have Errol Lewis speak to us at these events. Last year he spoke. So this makes it twice, so I hope this is a tradition, because he brought last year really important remarks. If you remember, last year we were in an election, a presidential election, and there was lots of questions about candidacies. And his message last year was, if you are not happy with your choices, then you should be running or getting other people to run, because that's how you affect the political process. And it was a very powerful message. And it was taken to heart by one of our students who's now a member of the New York State Assembly. So that was exactly the message that we need. Errol Lewis is the host of Inside City Hall, born in Harlem, raised in New Rochelle, holds a BA in government from Harvard, a master's in political science from Yale, a Brooklyn Law School law degree. He is a preeminent columnist and been on the editorial board of the Daily News. He's been a radio show host, an award-winning radio show host. He joined New York One in 2010 as the host of Inside City Hall. In addition, we see him often on CNN. I hope that's not where he's going. I hope he stays at New York One. We need him there. And he teaches as well at CUNY's Graduate School of Journalism. He is without doubt essential today for understanding the politics of New York City and what's going on all over the city. So with great delight and with a tremendous amount of gratitude, we welcome Errol Lewis to the podium.
Thank you very much, Ross. And good morning to everybody. I'm glad folks made it out even in the rain. I want to talk to you for just a couple of minutes, and Ross said we could have a little dialogue as well, so I welcome your questions. I wanted to talk to you about two different things that I think more so than most, you folks in this room will understand how and why they are connected. You, other than boring my wife, I think are the only people I could say this to. And it really is important, because I think we've reached a point where what everybody else is concerned about, Ross mentioned, CNN and the shout fests that goes on in cable television and has been for a number of months now. And, it's part of the process. It's part of democracy. It's fine. I try not to get too wrapped up in the silliness, try and bring some facts and some perspective, but it is sort of sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the room. And there are some important discussions at the local level that need to be continued. They can't be suspended. We can't be distracted. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So this is, if anybody read my column this week, this is kind of an extrapolation from it, and it's an important tale that requires, I think, folk in this room to maybe step up and do something about a problem that crept up on New York and hasn't gotten nearly the amount of attention that I think that it deserves. So the story goes like this. In 2003, up in Albany, in the dead of night, when the rent laws were being renewed, a provision was placed into the law making it possible for landlords to charge what is called preferential rents that are below the legal maximum. So even in rent-stabilized units, you have landlords, a number of them, more than a few. We're talking, in fact, about hundreds of thousands of units in which you have the legal maximum rent, and that would be indicated on the lease, and then, sort of like a discount, almost like a Groupon coupon, you're getting the preferential rent. Now, at first blush, this seems like a great thing, right? Who doesn't like a bargain? At the time, however, There were some process questions. Why are we doing something this important in the middle of the night? What are the implications going to be? A state senator at the time named Schneiderman said, I think this is a bomb hidden in a bill. And it turned out he was right. And it turned out we right now are seeing the bomb detonate. What the provision meant was that landlords could, in rent-stabilized units, offer this preferential rent, and at renewal, regardless of all of the whole rest of the regime around rent stabilization that we all know so well, they could say, you know what, we're going to revoke the preferential rent. They could do it for, in some ways, almost no reason, as far as I could tell. And I'm telling you about reporting that was done by ProPublica, and I'll get to that in a minute about the need for more investigative reporting. So many of these tenants got the surprise of their life when, after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, thinking that they were protected by the rent stabilization regime, all of a sudden they say, you know what, we're revoking your residential rent. Your new rent is 20% higher, 30% higher, 100% higher. In some cases, the landlord would say, well, we had a couple of months where you were a little bit late. We had to chase you down, and that's the reason we're going to revoke the preferential rent. It makes, and so here's where we are now. This is according to numbers from ProPublica. Statewide, there are about 266,000 units, stabilized units, where preferential rent is in effect. About 95% of them are here in the city. So for the city, let's call it 250,000 units where there's a gap. The average gap is not small. The average gap is $444 a month. And for some tenants, that, revoking that preferential rent is tantamount to an eviction notice, right? I mean, there are people who simply cannot go from $1,300 to $1,700 overnight or when their lease is up. It's believed to possibly be a driver of some of the homelessness crisis. It certainly is an economic stressor on many, many families and on many, many neighborhoods. So that happened. That is happening. That requires some work, I think, on the part of some of the folk in this room, I dare say, to try and address the legal and regulatory aspects of this. I will say, as a journalist, one thing that makes a lot of this harder, that makes the watchdog function harder that we try to provide in the media, is that it is explicitly by law, apparently, the records that DHCR has on the history of any unit's rent is not subject to the Freedom of Information law. I cannot find out. The landlord can find out the history of what was charged in this particular unit so that you can see whether it complied with, so DHCR and the landlord can decide among themselves whether rent increases have complied with the law. The tenant, if he or she knows to ask for it, can get it, but I can't get it, and so I can't tell you about it. We can't look at large numbers. We can't see where rent ripoffs have been happening. We can't say with any real certainty what the effect of what I just described to you has been about the revocation of these preferential rents. We don't know how big the bomb blast is, but we know that there is a problem. There's a hotline that ProPublica set up, and they said it is the #1 complaint they're hearing from people. They've invited people to sort of examine their lease, report any problems to them, and there's a problem. So I think this is ripe for public discussion. I am mystified why it hasn't become more of an issue politically. In an election year, this is the time to raise it. That's partly why I put it in the column, to try and bump what ProPublica had already done. We've got to sort of get some focus on this, which brings me to the second issue. And I don't want it to be as if I'm just complaining about the rain, because we've known that there are shrinking audiences, failing business models in the media for a long, long time. The sky has been falling for a long, long time. So I don't want to just say, I don't want to just lament how different things are from when I started out in this business. Things are very, very different. I was using an electric typewriter for one thing, so things are very different all the way around. But But I do want to just point out that if it is your general vague unease that things aren't getting covered the way they should, I want to sort of give you some facts that really underscore that. And this is not to alarm you, but just to tell you that there's an issue here. So over the last 20 years, this is nationwide, the newspaper workforce has dropped by 40%, and circulation has dropped by 30%. And okay, so maybe people aren't reading anymore, right? Maybe they're getting all their news from television, God forbid. This is not good, though. However, this is not good, because I will tell you, having spent most of my life in newspapers and now working in television, the very first thing, I mean, you know this from New York One, the very first thing we do when the morning crew comes in is they get the newspapers. It's effectively the assignment sheet for television news for the subsequent news cycle. It's true at the local level. You see Pat Kiernan do that every morning on New York One. It's true at the national level, where the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the New York Times are, you know, the starting point of essential reading for the national assignment editors. So when we hear that from 2004 to 2014, the number of daily newspapers in America is down by 126. 126 gone over a 10-year period. We're sort of immune to that, or you may not notice it because we're here in New York City where we have several dailies. But in town after town and county after county, the newspaper is simply going away. And then those that are still here, and this is a little bit deceptive because you can still get the Post and the News and the Times and Newsday, but the local coverage is being hollowed out because they're under the same pressures that led to the closure of those other 126 newspapers. And so, for example, if you go to the Queens County Courthouse, the press room is empty. There's a recent story about it, and they took a picture of a bunch of busted up typewriters. It's basically a storage room now. This is not good. There are over, this is the size of Queens is almost the size of Philadelphia. Over 200,000 criminal cases tried annually, and not one reporter sitting there to sort of follow the flow of cases, spot trends, talk about the judges, get to know the lawyers, get to see the law evolve in real time. I mean, that's what courthouse reporters do. And it was, when I was at the Daily News, the courthouse reporting was the cornerstone of the political reporting, the surrogates court in particular. The fact, as many of you know, the fact that it is one of the last places where there's something real about political patronage that makes a big difference. The county leaders, they'll give up lots of different powers. They won't give up that one because it's an important one. And it's not getting covered. More of the sort of weakening of the newspaper and the news business. The Daily News used to have beat reporters to cover, and no longer has beat reporters covering the following topics: health and hospitals, social services, economic development, politics. I mean, what used to be a robust presence down in room 9 at City Hall, for the Daily News, I think it's 1.5 people, 2 people. They're supposed to cover all of the agencies, plus the mayor, plus the city council. How much coverage do you think they can do? After 6 years of having what I thought was a very strong Greater New York section, the Wall Street Journal has decimated it, basically ended it. What used to be about 6 pages, appearing 6 days a week, is down to about 2 pages, 5 days a week, and many of the reporters have been reassigned. So there's a problem with a lot of this stuff, and in part, you heard from Ross that I'm kind of moving here and moving there, and I spend some time teaching to try and bring more young people into the profession. But the reality is, between all of the stresses on the business models, we can't really be sure that even well-trained, young, hungry journalists, the kind that I love to work with, I don't know where I can send them. There's this imbalance where the national cable channels, they're printing money. everybody's fascinated by the Trump phenomenon. Lots of people are tuning in. The advertisers are shoveling the money at the networks. And as you know, the balance between actual news and commentary about that relatively small amount of news is really kind of out of whack, right? Something like yesterday, where a narrowly passed controversial bill that is essentially dead on arrival in the Senate passed the House, and it turned into an all-day, all-night spectacle. And the spillover is happening today. I can tell you, because I've had these conversations with very, very high-ranking news executives, it is very hard to argue with an executive who just made $1 billion for his company. To tell them that you're doing this wrong. We need to focus more on what's going on in Sacramento and Albany and Tallahassee. They don't necessarily believe you. So here's where I wanted to conclude, and then we can talk a little bit. The Daily News just won a Pulitzer Prize. Could not be more proud of them. They were working in conjunction with ProPublica on a topic that folks in this room, I'm sure you knew about it all along, but the nuisance abatement law and how it was being used in a way that was overly heavy-handed, abusive at times, and was depriving completely innocent people of access to their homes over and over and over again. Won a Pulitzer Prize. I asked the editor who oversaw some of this, how much time did it take to put it together? And the estimate was it was about 2 man-years, meaning, actually it was a woman who did it, but there was a reporter and there was an editor, and it was the equivalent of 2 people working full-time for about a year to get it done. A 9-part series, really important, moved the needle on an important issue that affects real people, kind of came and went, and I asked, how many page views did this get? That's one of the new metrics, as we go digital. Something like 32,000 page views. And that translates into only a few $100s, So I'm not a businessman, but if you tell me 2 well-trained, experienced investigative reporters for a year, whatever the cost is, you could, assume it's McDonald's wages. It's going to be a lot more than a few $100s. And so we have a challenge here. I want you all to help me with that challenge, which is to try to conceive of some new business models, some new ways of paying for the news, to try and figure out. I've been in this profession long enough that, for example, I have no idea what my New York Times subscription costs, and probably most of you don't know either. And probably wouldn't think twice until it hit, I don't know, $500 or something. You might notice, it's like, oh, that's kind of a lot of money. But you have to have it because it's essential. Collectively, I don't know, I mentioned them, but any one publication, you might be able to say it about if it's extraordinary, like, say, the Times or the Journal. But collectively, our news diet is declining. What we get, and it's not just a matter of consumption. There has to be a certain amount of swagger. There has to be a certain amount of sort of forward motion. For example, New York One, we asked for some emails between the mayor and some outside lobbyists or advisors, as he would call them, who seem to have been sitting in on lots and lots of public meetings. This came to our attention because a request would go in for information from the administration, and somebody from this private public relations, shall we call it, firm or lobbying firm would call you back. And so we're saying, well, what's going on here? So we asked a few questions, and we found there was a relationship there. We, applied the Freedom of Information law to try and get to the bottom of it, and they didn't want to produce it. And so we sued them. That's where you really need news organizations to be confident enough, to be financially confident enough to do this. Same thing happened with the body camera footage. as we know, there was the stop, question, frisk sort of a debate and lawsuit that went on in the prior administration. One of the things that happened in the settlement was the judge said, why don't you try a body camera program? In fact, you must. So the city puts it together. They do the first trial. I think they had about 1,000 officers. There was a certain amount of footage. We asked for the footage, and they said, we'll give it to you for $38,000, that it will cost us to redact it properly so that a news organization could see it. We sued them. We're doing pretty well with the lawsuit, as a matter of fact. But an organization that is struggling, that is laying off reporters, that is shutting down bureaus. The Daily News, they used to have a fearsome investigative unit. It's essentially down to one person now. We're not going to be able to do the things that we need to do. We're not going to be able to be the watchdogs that we can. And so I put this out to you, and I'll conclude on this, as sort of pillars of our community who help this city stay great. I'm telling you that my side of the pillar, or my pillar, the news business, is crumbling a little bit. There's some stress there. It's starting to wobble. And if we can't figure out how to do it together, there will be many, many more, I fear, many more instances like that 2003 preferential rent law loophole that was slipped in the middle of the night. Other bombs that will explode, that will hurt the city that we love. And so we have a little bit of work to do. I think that's at least as important as trying to deal with what's happening in Washington. Because as some of you know, I'd say all but the youngest of you know, the presidents come and go and we stay, right? I was telling somebody, I just on the train on the way here, somebody stopped me and said, oh, this reminds me of Reagan. I said, well, Reagan's gone. Reagan's dead. We're still here. And he was older than I was. And I said, you do remember Nixon, right? And it's like they come and they go and we stay. So we're going to be fine in the end. But we need to prop up a few more of our pillars. And I'm here to let you know that the media is one of those. And you won't hear that said too much outside of this room. But the reality is we've got to try and figure out something for reasons that go beyond profitability and everybody having a job. That's frankly not my personal concern. My real concern is making sure that we're doing the coverage the way that we should and the way that you deserve. So thank you for listening.
We'll do a few questions. There are microphones or comments. We'll do, so there are microphones. You can go to the microphone and we'll, okay, let's start.
Testing.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Good
State
morning.
your name, please.
Thomas Lopez Pierre. I'm a candidate for City Council in Upper Manhattan. My question, Errol, is you spoke about the in the late at the night law concerning tenants' rights and the amendment that they added to the leases giving preferential rent. My question to you is, as a candidate, I am running against someone who's taken tens of thousands of dollars from the real estate industry. Do you believe that it's time for us to outlaw all industry and political action committee contributions so that our democracy can be protected from big money that's corrupting our law process? Thank you.
I don't think you can do that. It's been a debate for a long, long time about how do you get quote-unquote bad money out of politics. The Supreme Court, I think, has been pretty clear that money is speech, in effect, and you cannot curtail speech based on the content of it just because you don't like it. So even if you don't like the landlord has a right to make a contribution just like anybody else, personally. And, they have the right to support party organizations, independent expenditure committees, and other places. So I don't think we're going to silence landlords in New York City. It seems unlikely. And frankly, it's undesirable. I mean, they've got their needs and they've got the right to express those needs. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, like I said, I'm suggesting that the folks in this room who are experts in how you sort of set up a regulatory regime to sort of control problems that pop up, marketplace problems. I would like some of the great minds in this room to sort of figure out how do we deal with it, you know? I mean, even a simple line like along the lines of, you know, notwithstanding everything else regarding preferential rates, if it's a rent stabilized unit, you can't bump it up more than 2%, you know? I mean, it seems kind of simple to me, but I never passed the bar, so.
My name is Paul Korngold, not to be confused with Jerry Korngold. Don't get any trouble, get in trouble for what I'm about to say, but I did teach here 37 years ago. And I'm a fellow New Rochellian, such as you.
Good to
So
see
I
you.
want to talk about preferential rents because I respectfully disagree with everything you're saying. So let's just talk for a second about what really is a preferential rent. Preferential rent is a rent charged to a tenant when the market, the legal rent, is higher than the market rent. No one has tricked anybody. No one has done anything improper. Every tenant is required to get a lease which specifically says on a preferential rent rider that you have a lease below the legal rent, the legal stabilized rent. And when the time is up, we can raise your rent. No one is being fooled. Why does a tenant get a preferential rent? Not so the landlord can do anything.
me
Yes,
just
make a
interrupt.
question.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Bring it
So
to a
the question is, so now I got to think of a way of questions, stop making a speech. So really the question is, have we examined both sides? Because the landlord and the real estate community really contributes a lot to the city of New York, which the economics are used on other basis. So what do you think would happen if all of a sudden the rents are all of a sudden dramatically reduced? What would happen to the city's economy? That's really the question.
Oh, well, I mean, that's a question. The
That's
other
a
question is,
question,
what
but
if they,
I'm not allowed to
what
ask
if they
more
were
than
all
one
bumped
question.
up by an average of $400? Then what would happen? Well, you know, I'm glad the real estate community contributes. I mean, and some of those contributions, I think, are going to have to probably find their way to the record high homelessness and the communities, the community organizations and the shelter system that the rest of us are
Is that
shouldering the burden for paying.
Is that the responsibility of the landlord to take care
Wait a
of?
second. We're not debating here.
Right, agreed.
Thank you.
I'm
All
done.
right.
Thank you.
250,000 units, average $400 per unit is the gap. Now, that, if we want to leave it to the whims or preferences of each individual landlord, that's the system we have right now. The point of the series, the point of my column, the point of my mentioning it today is there are some people who think that it is a driver of the record high homelessness. There are some people who think at a minimum, and you'd have to agree with me on this, that it makes a shambles of the stabilization regime, right? I mean, what's the point of stabilization, right? I mean, it says also on that same lease, you know, you're stabilized, it won't go up more than 1%, 2%, but also, in effect, it might go up 20%. Now, is that okay? Well, a lot of consumers, let's call them that, a lot of consumers are getting what they consider an unfair surprise about something that's much more important than a radio or a television. It's whether or not they can keep their family where they are. And that's a problem where the cost of it, the burden of trying to figure out what happens with it, is shifted to the taxpayers. So the taxpayers ought to have something to say about it, I would think.
Thank you.
On this side, we're going to, these will be the last two, then we'll go on to the awards. So
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, in 2013, you did a fantastic thing. You moderated a mayoral debate that was hosted by the Islamic Center at NYU and the Arab American Association. And the reason that was great, it was the first of its kind. But I talked to people about the event, and a lot of communities in that community who are communities of color saw you, and they're like, how awesome it is. We're a community of color. There's a journalist of color holding this very powerful discussion. And it sent a signal. I thought of that when you talked about the young budding journalists. And maybe there were people who watched that who then want to become journalists. So the question I have is, how is the state of diversity in the profession? And-
Dismal.
Okay. I mean, what needs to be done so that those young attendees at debates like that see more and more people like you and like, I want to do that?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, the easiest thing is just to make a plug that it really is one of the best journalism schools in the country. The CUNY J School is fabulous, and it is a bargain. It's $20,000 for tuition for 3 semesters and a paid summer internship. as opposed to $70,000 for 2 semesters at Columbia. So it's a bargain. I love and respect Columbia. I taught there for a semester in their J school. This is a different kind of a product, and it is specifically intended, it's a public university, to provide public benefit, including getting more New York City kids, getting more diversity into the newsroom. So it's a long-term project, but one thing that has happened since Election Day is that many news organizations, including ProPublica, WNYC, journalism schools in general, have gotten a lot of donations from people who I think now realize and appreciate a little bit more how critical it is to have a robust news media. So that's a partial answer, but I'd say also, look, tell everybody you know. I tell kids all the time, it is a great profession. You can see the world, you can help your community, you can find out stuff, you can be nosy, you can challenge authority. It's okay to have a short attention span. All of these things that were a problem in high school actually turn out to be job skills, right?
Okay, last question. Mr. Sanford.
Errol, you can expect the next city council speaker to be crowned at City Hall, which became the Bingo Hall, former home of ECW, on January 3 or 10, 2018. Just in case you didn't know.
What is it? I didn't get it. You're asking about the speaker's race?
No. What I'm saying is you can expect the next city council speaker to be crowned at City Hall, which became the Bingo Hall, formerly ECW, on January 3 or 10, 2018.
Oh, I see. Well, the scuttlebutt, this is just, rumors passing around City Hall, and as the mayor and other people know, some of those rumors are worth nothing, but, we still trade in them. The scuttlebutt is that because the current mayor, because Mayor de Blasio doesn't appear to have a ferocious challenge on the primary and maybe not in the general, he has begun intervening in the jockeying that's going on in the city council about who becomes the next speaker. It strikes me as highly believable, but it doesn't, to me, it doesn't particularly matter until we know what the field looks like.
Okay, thank you. We're going to bring this section to a close and go to what has become a wonderful annual event, the Civic Fame Awards. So I call up Anthony Crowell, Dean, to be with me. And okay, and the first one, where's Brian? On the awards? Okay. All right, the first one is for David N. Dinkins. And Mr. Mayor, do you want to stay there, or do you want to come up? Okay. Okay. Well, it is a great honor. It is a great honor. The 106th mayor of New York City, 1990 to 1993, brought dignity, warmth, grace to the office, a strong will to succeed. We were very fortunate to have a wonderful session about his biography here. It's on our website. You can see it. It's really quite wonderful and charming. I thought I'd go back and tell 2 stories from the book because the book is really quite revealing of a life well led and of the personality of this great mayor. In 1944, when he was 17 years old and the war was going on, he and all of his friends wanted to get into the military, but at that time you were drafted, and in his draft boards he found that a lot of the African Americans were just shunted to one place or another. They didn't get what they wanted. He figured out he wanted to be a Marine, and in order to do that he had to enlist, and he figured out that he couldn't wait for the draft. So at age 17 he starts going to the Marine recruiting offices. Now the Marines were only integrated in 1942, and so this was a big deal. He goes to Camden, he goes to Jersey City, he goes to Newark. Every place he goes, they say, we have our quota of Negro Marines. We don't want you. So he goes to New York, said, we won't even talk to you. You're from New Jersey. He goes He goes to Philadelphia, and they say the same thing. We have our quota. We don't want you. But he persists, and he keeps coming back and coming back. And finally they say, okay, we'll give you the physical. We'll give you the physical. And they give him the physical, and he fails. He is now a high blood pressure. He said, I don't have high blood pressure. I'm 17 years old. I weigh 130 pounds. But there's high blood pressure, so they keep always high blood pressure. Goes to his own doctor. He finally goes back, pesters and pesters and pesters, and finally the recruiter says, okay, gives him a letter to give to the draft board. And he goes back to now he's still in high school, finishes his high school senior year. On his birthday, July 10th, he goes to the draft board, gives them the letter, and 2 weeks later, he's in the Marines. And that's a great story about persistence. And then he goes in the Marines, but he's sent not to Paris Island, but to Montfort Point, which is where African Americans were trained, separately, segregatedly. And so he trains with them, becomes a Marine, honored, and becomes a part of the Montfort Point Marines. Now, the Montfort Point Marines are in the same category as the Tuskegee Airmen. And they were finally honored in 2012 with the gold medal from Congress, and David Dinkins was one of them. He got the medal, and it's a very proud achievement of a man, a patriot, and stick-to-itiveness. Tells a lot about his patriotism and his willingness to serve this country and this city. And I want to tell another story, but I want to read it because it's in his words. And it's about something that he was well known for, his manners, his politeness. He, after the Marines, goes to Howard, graduates cum laude in math, decides he wants to continue in graduate school, decides that's not for him, so he's now selling insurance in Trenton, I believe. And so this is what he says about selling insurance. He says, I started wearing a hat so I could take it off. I would knock at a single-family home and wait until the lady of the house answered. Now, these are very low, these are under $1,000 policies where you have to collect the premium every week or month. As soon as she opened the door, I would remove my hat with one hand and introduce myself. Mrs. Smith, I would say, how are you today? My name is David Dinkins. I'm from the Progressive Life Insurance Company, and then I'd launch into my presentation. It was important that she see me take off my hat. I was showing respect to people who receive very little of it. People pay respect to those who give respect. And besides, whether or not it was reciprocated, I felt that it was the way she ought to behave. I had always been taught to polite, and I found that to be good business. And then he says on, a little bit later on, about the other insurance salesmen who didn't have the same standards and politeness. He said, I would see them, and I'd say, this woman's your client. She's paying your salary, and she is entitled to better than being called by her first name. Susie is a girl. Mrs. Smith is a woman. There is a profound difference. And of course, he's not so naive not to know about the racial side too, and he talks more about that. But I think it's a wonderful story about David Dinkins and about his upbringing and about what he brought to City Hall and to this city. And I wanted to share that with you. On July 10th, it's a couple months away, David Dinkins will be 90 years old. Yeah. He's given so much to this city. He's been a regular attender at these breakfasts. We had this wonderful session here in 2013. I must say my general practitioner physician is here. He's 7 years older than I am. And I want to thank David, thank you for being here, in case I screw up completely. But with great honor and great pleasure and with great admiration, we present the Civic Fame Award to David N. Dinkins, 106th Mayor. Where's our crack photographer? Okay, photographer. Thank you. Would I say a few words?
Yes, I would like to.
Okay.
First, I thank you, of course, And my friend Earl, you did a great job. Thank you. Yeah. I am pleased, of course, to get this award. When I come home with this, my wife will say, that'll look nice in your office. But I truly am, but it really isn't me. And in this audience, there are several people who used to make me look smart, and people thought that I was really intelligent. Carol Clarican right there, doctor, and see Wally Ford over here, and then there's my buddy Skip Hartman out there who, while not part of our administration, was always helpful and useful to me. So it really isn't, it truly is not I. It is a lot of wonderful, bright, young women and men who did the good things. And I will claim credit only for selecting Bill Lynch, who died much too early at age 72. But as he said to me when I was Manhattan Borough President, he said, you know, you ought to get Max Griffiths. I said, who's she? Maxine Griffiths, who today is Executive Vice President to Lee Bollinger at Columbia University, was an architect, a city planner, and just brilliant. In those days, we had the Board of Estimate, and the Board of Estimate had which consisted of the mayor, controller, president of the council, and the 5 borough presidents, and we also had a vote in the budget. Today's borough presidents, while I think they do a great job, but they have essentially just a bully pulpit. We had real power. And with people like Maxine and so many others, when I had to debate and argue with the other borough presidents to get my share of the budget, they were there. And so I just had the good fortune over time of having had a lot of really wonderful people. And I know it. I know that it wasn't David, it was David's people, his friends. Although I used to tell them, I take your advice 95% of the time, but you've got to understand that the Lincoln Rule obtains. They would say, well, what's the Lincoln Rule? I said, Abe Lincoln would put a question to his cabinet, and then he'd take a vote. They'd go around the table, nay, 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 nay. Lincoln would say, the ayes have it. So I taught them that. But I do not exaggerate when I say that the wonderful people with whom I worked in the borough president's office and the mayor's office are really bright, committed, dedicated folks who made me look good. So on their behalf, I accept this award. Thank you, buddy. Thanks very much.
Okay, the next, Wayne Hawley. Wayne, come on up. Anthony Crowell already spoke a bit about Wayne, his retiring as general counsel of the Conflicts of Interest Board, a Yale Law graduate. He started off first in New York as, and that I wasn't aware of this, executive director of the MFY Legal Services, along for 12 years, 1987, 1999, a very important public interest law firm with great history and wonderful work. He was there and then moved on to the Conflicts of Interest Board in 1999, and for 18 years has served the city as general counsel and advisor and the person the go-to person on the Conflicts of Interest Board issues in Chapter 68. Wayne, with Mark Davies, Mark is here and got a Civic Fame Award a year ago, they became the two of them the voice of municipal ethics for the 350,000 city workers. Govern functioned better as a result of the advice and guidance that Wayne has provided to the city. He's a great listener, has solid judgment, abundant integrity, and he fulfilled in his work a very high mission. I went back and looked at the 1988 Charter Revision Commission report, which created the Conflicts of Interest Board. They had 3 explicit goals: clear rules, knowledge of those rules by the city employees, and an enforcement of the rules. And Wayne made all 3 of those goals happen. He explained the rules with clarity. I and thousands of other city people have called up Wayne on the telephone and said, I got this problem. What do you think? And Wayne would give you the answer. He would think it through with you. And it was always sound and wonderful advice. Practical, unflappable, with a realistic sense of human nature. He trained and informed city workers. Year after year at our annual ethics conference, the room was filled when Wayne talked about the rules and explained the rules. And on the table you see our conflicts of interest handbook. Wayne is responsible for probably half of that, edited half of the articles he co-wrote, edited the book. It is now a desk book that is incredibly valuable to city workers. That's part of the training that was anticipated by the Charter Revision Commission. And when it came to enforcement, fair and tough. He's retiring now. I personally am going to miss Wayne. I can't believe that we're not going to have him come back every year in one of those classrooms upstairs with 150 people listening, and as he explains why you can't accept a gift more than $50, and why you can't send your resume to that wonderful contractor that loves you, and why it is that your spouse is also counted, and all those things that are so difficult to understand or people don't want to understand. Wayne explained it carefully, endlessly, and got good results for the city. So with great feelings of friendship, we present to Wayne Hawley our Civic Fame Award.
Just a few words. First, it must be said that to be on any roster with Mayor Dinkins is a tremendous honor, and so I'm humbled by that. The second thing I should say is about this center and this place, and looking at the program here this morning, and looking at the connections that the center and the law school have had with just the little Conflicts of Interest Board, from the City Law Fellows to previous awardees of the Civic Fame Award, Mark Davies, who was mentioned, Jeff Freelander, who the board can't really claim when he received the award its first year, but is now a member of the board. And these are just examples of the wonderful things that this center has done in its history, and it's all, of course, thanks to Ross and the support it gets from another dear friend of ours, Anthony, of course, and a board member now for the past 5 years. 5 years? 5 years. So it's a special honor to get the award from this place. And the last thing, just as a point of information, and I don't want to cost the Times a subscriber, Mr. Lewis, but I think 365 home delivery is about $900 now. So you check your bill. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. You can see Wayne can't let an untruth stand. God. All right, Wayne, leave your telephone number. We want to call you. Okay, Con Edison, Francis Rashevsky, Senior Vice President. Yeah. Well, she's come up. Francis Rashevsky is a great friend, a member of the Koch administration, old friend, very well known to many of us, and been in government now as a senior vice president at Con Edison, where she's been now for more than a decade. I want to speak a little bit about Con Edison. If, as you leave, look out the windows behind you, and you'll see where Con Edison is. That is a substation. It's an area substation, and it is an enormous part of the infrastructure of the city. There are 14 transformers in that substation, all of them bigger than the largest UPS truck you've ever seen. It receives power at 69,000 volts and transforms it down to 13,000 volts, where it spreads around lower Manhattan. There's enough power that goes through that one substation to serve 300,000 homes, about 1 million people. That's Con Ed. We depend on Con Edison in an enormous way. And so I think, and we're luckier, we can watch them do that right out the window, and I urge you to take a look at it. For New York Law School, we're a constant, Con has been a constant companion. They were the sponsor of the very first breakfast, and this is the 143rd breakfast, and they are still with us, and that's part of their civic commitment. They regularly attend, many of the people regularly attend our breakfasts, and we are really delighted that they become part of this family. But Con Edison is more than that. Con Edison is a benefactor to the civic groups of the city. Last year, under Francis Reshevsky's leadership, the company gave $12 million in relatively smallish grants to over 600 nonprofits. In other words, it's there for everybody in this city. It is really a powerhouse. It's the one that can keep groups going in all sorts of ways. And I'll just give you some of the ideas, some of the ones that Con Ed supports. There is the Energy Tech High School in Long Island City, an unusual high school. It's a true 6-year high school because at the end of the 6th year, they give associate degrees, not just high school diplomas, but it's a 2-year college associate degree. Devoted to STEM topics, Con Ed provides mentoring, help organize it, and it continues to sponsor it. There's Generation Citizen. It provides public middle school children ways of learning about government and civics. We all know not too much taught today in the public schools. Then there's the Coro Immigrant Civic Leadership Program, where Con Ed supports training leaders in the immigrant communities. There's the Art Connection, five tickets. It's a way of providing very inexpensive tickets to public school children to attend some of the great and premier events here in the city, which they otherwise would not be able to attend. There's the Blue Star Families Program, which assists military families to adjust to the stress of military life. The Green City Force, another program for youth to participate directly in environmental programs, and the list goes on and on and on. Hundreds of civic organizations know that they can count on the support of Con Edison. It is the quintessential good citizen. It supports the public and the not-profit world of this city. And for all its good works for the city of New York and these organizations, we're delighted and happy to present to Con Edison with Francis Reshevsky the Civic Fame Award.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Anthony. I accept this on behalf of the 15,000 women and men who do work every day to keep the energy going in New York and who are very committed to our nonprofit partners and their volunteerism. And we're proud of our support of City Law Breakfast. And as Wayne mentioned, if you look at the book, it really is an amazing history of New York City if you look at the list of speakers that have been here over the years. So we're happy to be a small part of it. I congratulate the mayor and the other honorees, and thank you very much.
New York won. Errol, come on up. Come on up, Errol. This is the propitious. This is the 25th anniversary of Inside City Hall. Began in 1992. So this is your 25th anniversary. I recall being interviewed in like 1991 by a very young reporter who was, they were doing a test interview on how do we do a cable news program. And I remember being interviewed and I said, what is a cable news program? Well, we learned. And we learned how important New York One is to this community. And Errol, in some ways, anticipated what I was going to say, talking about the demise of the print media. But think about this. New York Newsday, which in my time in government was the most aggressive investigative reporters on, and they had a beat reporter on transportation who was there all the time. They ended publication in 1995. The New York Sun ended in 2008. The New York Times separate Metro section ended in 2008, and Errol mentioned the Wall Street Journal section. Gabe Pressman, remember Gabe Pressman? Everybody remember Gabe? Well, he's 93 and alive, but he's tweeting, but he's not broadcasting. So you can go and get Gabe's tweets. He did one just 2 days ago. I looked it up. I wanted to know. So New York One fills this enormous gap. Inside City Hall on every weekday evenings at 7 and 10, an hour-long show, true interviews, long interviews, in-depth interviews. We really learn a lot about the politics of the city, and it has with Errol Lewis as the anchor, but also with a wonderful group of reporters. And these names you'll all remember or know: Bobby Kuza, Zach Fink, Courtney Gross, Michael Herzenberg, Grace Rao, Josh Robbins, Michael Scotto, Alberto Prieto. They're out there doing the work of reporting that no one else is doing quite as well. And in the past, Dominic Carter, Melissa Russo, Andrew Kurtzman. I remember on 9/11, as the buildings fell, and I was down here and started with lots of others walking up West Broadway. Down West Broadway came Andrew Kurtzman in a camera, rushing forward to be at the scene of, as we were leaving, to be at the World Trade Center. And those of us who are addicted to Inside City Hall, we know it's Mayor de Blasio on Monday night. We know Tuesday's the Wise Guys. We know Wednesdays is Political Rundown with Curtis Sliwa and Herson Barrero. Any night's the Consultant's Corner. And the news is always there. Just on Wednesday night, when we had a taxi demonstration at City Hall, Errol had the taxi drivers on the show, including a taxi driver who took him from Harlem to Bronx when no one else would at the time, so who turned out to be very articulate. So for New Yorkers who want to know about politics and government, New York One is the best. And Errol Lewis is the best I have seen in any time, and doing interviews, asking tough questions, and bringing the news and the commentary that's important to all of us. So we are proud to honor Inside City Hall on its 25th anniversary with the Civic Fame Award. Okay, you heard enough? And then we have Sheila Murphy Aresti. Where's Sheila? Where is she? Come on up, Sheila. Sheila was an awardee in the first year, but there were important personal issues that kept her away from accepting, and she's here today, and I want to present her with her award. Sheila's a graduate of New York Law School, class of 94. She was the first City Law Fellow. She set the standard for all the fellows that came afterwards. In the very first issue of City Law, she had a bylined article, and it was a wonderful support of all of us at the center. She moved on to work at the Department of Investigation. The Mayor's Office of Contract Services has become with her husband, Stephen, a major financial supporter of the Center for New York City Law. She and Stephen endowed a fund to support a summer intern at the center, and has been a wonderful friend of this law school and of the center, and just a wonderful person to have been our very first City Law Fellow. And for that, we give her a Civic Fame Award. You want to say something? Yeah.
Actually, when Ross asked me to be the fellow, he was just putting the center together, and I really couldn't follow what he was doing. He said, well, I think, maybe we'll do this and we'll do that. I'm thinking of this. And the article that I wrote for the first City Law was on the lobbying rules. And Ross said, go over to the county clerk's office and see if you can get the lobbying rules. And we'll, it's about transparency. We want the city to know what we're doing. And so I called the general counsel, and he said, what lobbying rules? Well, I don't know where we are. So we went in the back, and there was a file, and we pulled them out, and we had 1 through 6 and then 10 through 13, but we couldn't find the ones in between. It's amazing how far the center has come, from the oath decisions to the lobbying rules to the, to writing about the decisions by the Department of Contracts on, responsibility and responsiveness. It's amazing how far it's come now and how the city has relied on this publication and city land and come to the breakfast. And I'm just so proud to be part of the center and very humbled to have been invited here to receive this award. So thank you very much.
That's it for me.
So now it's my pleasure to present our last award, and it's not technically a Civic Fame Award because Ross could win it every year. But it's a really special recognition of a lifetime of achievement and contributions to the legal profession. And last year, I nominated Ross kind of secretly, along with some of our colleagues here. And he was selected by the American Bar Association's section of state and local government law as the recipient of their Jefferson B. Fordham Lifetime Achievement Award. So we are thrilled to be able to present that. I'm going to ask our board chair, Arthur Abbey, who's been an extraordinary supporter of the school, the center, and really just the conscience of this institution, to come up here and help present it. And I also want to just acknowledge my colleagues in the room, our academic dean, Bill LaPiana, and a number of other faculty colleagues who are here to support Ross and support the center. And also, I'm excited that so many of our students are here today, as well as a large group of admitted students who will be joining us next year. So it's a wonderful tribute. Plus, many of your fellows came back for this moment, which is really nice. So this is quite auspicious. So let me say, Ross's professional accomplishments are as impressive as they are long. He was an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District, serving as the chief appellate attorney and the chief of the Environmental Enforcement Unit. He went on to join the Koch administration, as we all know. First, he was special advisor to the mayor, and eventually he was appointed as Commissioner of Transportation, an agency that still benefits from Ross's vision and policy accomplishments decades later. You still have the desk that you personally had built, a stand-up desk here, and a wonderful...
I paid for it.
You did pay for it, but...
I paid for it.
He paid for it, but what was wonderful about the desk when you taught me about the desk was that you were in the same space that you occupied, because New York Law School occupied the same facilities as the transportation department. It was really interesting. But, I want to say that when I had dinner with Mayor Koch weeks before he passed, we talked about you. We're kind of gossiping a little bit. And he said, Ross, he's really smart, very smart man. And I couldn't agree more. After Ross finished his time in government, he led a highly successful career in private practice until he came to our school. And now as a senior professor, he's really been just a phenomenal force here, a robust publisher of unique and impressive thought leadership. He's routinely consulted as the go-to expert for media covering city government. He's quoted frequently in all the major news outlets. And when he established the center 22 years ago, he really put New York Law School on the map as a central hub for civic dialogue and in-depth policy discussions with the most important policymakers in the city. And year after year, government officials from successive administrations and other important civic figures come to these breakfasts because they know the center offers a fair and objective forum to have thoughtful discussions with audiences of peers and others who are deeply knowledgeable and deeply caring about public policy. For years, the publications of the Center for New York City Law have been must-reads for people across government and those who wish to engage on policy initiatives with government agencies. Ultimately, the uniqueness of Ross himself has really made all of this possible. He's urbane, he's soulful, he's passionate and wise, and there's really no one more generous than Ross. He's been a wonderful guide, friend, and mentor to so many, especially me. And he's a believer in the value and the dedication of those who work very hard in government, and the center has showcased the important and complex work that public servants do and the positive impact that public servants have on those they serve. He believes government officials, and in particular government attorneys, should be celebrated and acknowledged, since most work without notice or acclaim unless, of course, something goes wrong. And I think this truly sets Ross and the center apart from others doing similar work. For me personally, I don't think I'd be standing here as dean today if it weren't for the center or Ross. As a government attorney for many years, the center was an invaluable resource to me, providing critical tools to do my job and validating our efforts. And in 2003, Ross brought me here as an adjunct to teach the city law seminar, and I was given a very unique opportunity to show law students the impact that city government can have and all the different ways that lawyers operate inside and outside of government. So I'm forever grateful for that experience and the opportunity and the doors it opened. And you've been a mentor, a close confidant. You've been one of the leaders I turn to several times a day in this community. And as we often joke, and I want to recognize Ross's spouse, Alice Sandler, who is, she gets this award too. She's been part of the bedrock of this center. Yes, as they like to say, and we joke, they're my New York City parents, and I guess it takes a village to raise a dean. So, but in all seriousness, I'm really proud to give you this award.
My name is Arthur Abbey. I'm a graduate of this school, and I was thinking about what I would say before I came up here, and I was reminiscing in my own mind that it was 60 years ago, just about now, that I was finishing my first semester at New York Law School. And at the time, the school was not located here. It was located on the other side of town on William Street, and the property was condemned, and it's now houses the headquarters of the New York City Police Department. And the trustees at that time received a condemnation award from the city. They came over to this horrible area called Tribeca. They managed to invest in some property, and here we are today. The land that big building to our right, 60 stories, is on, was part of the law school. It was sold, and we were able to use that money to build this building. And we have come such a long way, and in the long way in the last 15 or 20 years is really remarkable. And as the saying goes in New York, it's real estate, real estate, real estate. And when I went to law school, there were 85 people in my graduating class. 84 of them were men, and one person was a woman. I just learned that the incoming class for this year will be 57% women and 43% men. That's how far we have come. Ross is a personal friend, a dear friend. I also want to recognize his daughter. Josie, would you stand up, please? Josie is one of 3 daughters. They're all very accomplished. And you're a wonderful, wonderful family. And for those of you who have ever had dinner at the Sandler apartment, it's like going to a salon. There are always the most interesting people. And the last dinner that I attended at the Sandler apartment was the night of the elections results. And it was one of the few dinner parties that ended very early. So, Ross, you've done a remarkable job for this law school. You are part of the law school. You are part of the city that we live in and that we love. And I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to know you, to know your family, and to watch how this has grown into something that's really remarkable. So thank you, Ross.
I only have a couple brief comments. First, I want to thank Alice. We really put these breakfasts together. The format was Alice's idea, and she really has been the host of all of these things, and I want to thank you. The law school's been terrific to me, for me and for us. I love it. I want to, a person who was really important to me, David Schoenbrod, who's a professor here, who brought me here, and then Harry Wellington, of blessed memory, who was the dean at the time and really encouraged this center and said, we have to do it this way, and was really quite a wonderful supporter. I also want to thank you all for coming. This is a great breakfast. We love all this, but the idea is to have these kinds of conversations of the kind that Errol gave us today. I hope you got that message about the press. I was thinking about it too. I actually teach a course where students are supposed to be doing journalism. I'm going to talk to Errol about how we can do more here at the law school. There are messages here. We meet each other, we learn, and that's what this is about. Thank you all for being a part of it, and thank you for this award, Dean Crowell. We'll be back in probably August with more breakfast.